So Peter, a couple years ago, my friend Mike was flying down in the Bahamas, gets assigned an unpublished hold, breaks into a complete sweat as he says to himself, "Man, I hope I remember how to do that."
Yeah, you know, that's the problem. We do that so infrequently that we forget how.
Here's how we do it.
So let's look at automated versus manual holding. Here's some examples of automated holding. So we look on the plan view and we find the Abbey intersection, and that is a holding pattern in lieu of a procedure turn. As we look at the flight plan, we find the word hold, H-O-L-D, in the flight plan sequence after the Abbey waypoint. We look back at the plan view and we find the Gorst intersection, and that is the missed approach holding point. And again, in the flight plan after the Gorst waypoint, we find the word hold. The point being here is that the G1000 will fly the holding entry and the holding pattern for you as long as the autopilot is in GPS mode. Now, there are times when you may need to hold, but there is no hold in the flight plan. For this, we need to perform manual holding, where we configure and manage the GPS and autopilot ourselves. Now, manual holding will come in two flavors. The first being unpublished holding, so you get an ATC clearance of hold northwest of the Bunny intersection on the arrival, maintain 8,000 and expect further clearance at 0445 Zulu. Or it comes in the published flavor, hold at dumb as published, maintain 9,000 and expect further clearance at 0425 Zulu. A common point of confusion is that many instructors will refer to automated holds in the flight plan as published holds, but if you get instructions to fly a hold that is published on the chart, but it's not in the flight plan, you're going to have to fly that hold manually. So let's look at the Bunny to arrival into Atlanta's Peachtree DeKalb Airport. And as we zoom on in here, you can see that the airplane is over the rocket VOR. Air traffic control keys up and it says, "I have holding instructions for you, advise ready to copy." And they say, hold at dumb as published, maintain 9,000 and expect further clearance at 0425 Zulu. So we're going to fly the rocket transition inbound to dumb, and upon reaching dumb, we will have to fly the published holding pattern manually. Pro tip number 1 is perform a quick holding briefing prior to the hold. Now, you probably remember early in your instrument days of learning the technique of the 5 T's. Well, we actually call them the 6 T's, and I know it sounds like an entry-level procedure, but I've been on 747 flight decks where pilots are using the 6 T's to manage their hold. The first T being turn applies to heading, time is clock or DME, twist is frequency, course, and OBS, and we'll get into that. Throttle is speed and altitude. Talk is air traffic control. This is where you'll need to make your mandatory report. And toggle may be the new one that you haven't seen before. This is going to refer to automation. Now let's apply the quick holding briefing and the T's to our current example. So the first T, turn, applies to the holding entry. In this case, it's going to be a direct entry. We turn to the outbound leg. So upon reaching dumb, we'll turn right to a heading of 328. The next T is time. It's either distance or time. In this case, it's noted it's a 7 nautical mile hold. So it'll be 7 nautical mile legs in the hold. The next T is twist. Here we'll need to set the OBS to the holding course, the inbound leg on the hold. In this case, that's going to be 148. Throttle, this is where when you get within 3 minutes of the fix, ATC is expecting you to start slowing down to your holding speed. Talk, this is where we're going to practice the mandatory report. Now let me ask you a question. When was the last time you gave one of these mandatory reports to ATC that you're entering the hold? My guess is it's probably been a while. So it's a good idea to practice it up so you sound really good on the radio. And finally, toggle. Toggle refers to automation. In this case, if dumb is now my active waypoint, I'm going to go into OBS mode, and we'll talk about more of that in a second. Pro tip number 2, use OBS to create the holding course. Inbound to the holding fix, we're going to enter OBS mode, which will allow us, upon arriving at the fix, to select the holding course on the HSI.
Now, OBS makes some pilots uncomfortable, and we find it's useful to remember that it provides 2 features. We like to say OBS stands for Other Bearings and Suspend. Now the other bearing feature means that the course knob comes alive, and we're going to use that to select the holding course. And the suspend feature basically means that once we get to our holding fix, the GPS is not going to sequence on. It's going to allow us to stay there.
So let's look at OBS using our example with the holding at dumb that's been assigned. So if we go on over to the primary flight display, you can see here at the bottom, I'm going to use the soft key, OBS. Note that the OBS annunciator illuminates at the bottom of the HSI in magenta, and when we look at the top of the primary flight display above the flight mode annunciators, it says OBS 105 course inbound to dumb. Pro tip number 3, use autopilot heading in nav modes for holding.
Yeah, the autopilot can't follow GPS guidance through the entire manual hold, so we have to use 2 different modes. Outbound, we're going to fly the leg using heading mode. And inbound, we're going to fly that leg using nav mode.
So let's look at what some airlines refer to as the positions in the hold. Position 1 is going to be the fix. Position 2 is when we're abeam the fix. Position 3 is the end of the outbound leg where we turn inbound. And position 4 is when we're established inbound on the holding leg. So let's apply the positions to the current example with the hold at dumb. Position 1 being the fix. So here the airplane is about a half a mile from arriving at dumb. We're in OBS mode, so my first T is going to be turn. So I place the airplane into heading mode. I watch the distance count down, and my primary focus is really on my HSI. I want to see the to from flag flip and my RMI needle swing. So I'm looking at the flag. The flag flips, there's the RMI needle swing, and I now turn the airplane to the right. Remember, it's a direct entry, so I'm going to turn to the outbound leg being 328. Now, I find many different airplanes with different autopilots, so for me personally, I use the same autopilot technique of turning my heading bug. I'll never turn the heading bug beyond the tail of the HSI. So I simply just wait for the heading of 328 to pass the tail. Once it does, I'll just fine-tune my heading bug to the desired heading of 328. Then I move on to the next T, time. In this case, there's nothing for me to time. It's going to be nautical mile legs. Twist, here's where I take the course knob and I set the course needle to 148. So I start twisting it. Oops, I overshot 148. No problem. I'll just turn it back. And then I call out course 148 set. We'll zoom on out. And my next T is throttle. Here I make sure I'm at the holding speed of 120. And my altitude is 9,000 feet. Talk, I'll make my mandatory report to ATC. Cirrus 3 Charlie Papa is entering the hold over dumb, 9,000 feet at 15 minutes past the hour. And the final T, toggle, that deals with my automation. Here I make sure that I'm in OBS mode and I'm happy with the autopilot mode enunciators. Heading, altitude, 9,000. The next position, position 2, is abeam the fix. So here, as the airplane is on the heading of 328, I watch my RMI needle to look for the 90-degree point. I see the flag flip, and I start my T's. Turn. In this case, I don't need a wind correction angle. Time. It's going to be 7 nautical mile legs, so I'll watch the distance count up to 7 nautical miles. Twist is not applicable. Throttle is not applicable. Talk is not applicable. And now toggle. So I'm waiting now to arrive at position 3, which is going to be the end of the outbound leg where I'll need to turn inbound. So now the airplane arrives at position 3, the turn inbound. So for here, we start with T, turn. I'm going to turn the heading bug 90 degrees to the right. Its right hand turns in the hold. And then I'm going to dial up an additional 45 degrees to set up a 45-degree intercept. So turn, time, twist, throttle, talk, toggle. For toggle, I'm going to push the nav button on the autopilot. I'm going to call out GPS armed. And now the airplane continues around onto the desired heading, and we await for the airplane to establish itself on the inbound course, the holding leg. The course is alive. At this point, I'm really carefully watching my flight mode enunciators. And once the autopilot picks up the course, I call up GPS green. That's my call out. And the airplane establishes itself on the 148 desired track, inbound to dumb. At this point, I've now reached position 4, and the airplane tracks towards the holding fix of dumb, which is position 1. To stay in the hold, we simply continue to use heading mode for the outbound leg and nav mode for the inbound leg. We toggle back and forth between these two modes for as long as we stay in the hold. Here's the airplane approaching dumb. I'm going to zoom in on the HSI just so you can see what's going to happen. I'm going to sync up my heading bug, and I'm going to go into heading mode on the autopilot. I watch the flag flip, and I look for the RMI swing. There's the flag flip, the RMI is swinging, and I start my 6Ts, turn. I'm going to initially turn it 90 degrees. Remember, it's right-hand turns in the hold, so I'm turning to the right. Once the airplane starts turning in the right direction, I then continue my heading bug around to the tail of the course needle, which in this case, again, is going to be 328. Turn, time, twist, throttle, talk, toggle.
Now, a lot of pilots get disoriented when they're watching the moving map and they don't see the racetrack pattern that they're used to seeing when they're holding. Just remember, when you're doing manual holding, your only visual reference is the magenta line inbound on the holding course.
So now that I've reached position 3, I start the 6Ts again. This is where I turn inbound. So I take my heading bug, I'm going to turn it 90 degrees to the right. Then I'm going to dial up an additional 45 degrees. This is my intercept. Turn, time, twist, throttle, talk, toggle. I push the nav button on the autopilot. I call out GPS armed. The airplane comes around to my desired heading. It establishes on the course. And now the airplane's reached position 4, and it's inbound to the holding fix of dumb. For exiting the hold, it's as simple as exiting OBS mode. The Garmin, once it reaches dumb, will sequence on with the rest of the flight plan. So you can see here, I've turned off OBS mode. Notice at the top, the enunciator no longer says OBS with the course, it just says direct dumb. And I'll just jump it ahead a little bit here for the training purposes. You can see we're 0.3 from dumb. Now watch what happens here. As I reach dumb, the Garmin creates a fix-to-fix from dumb to bunny. It resumes the rest of the flight plan. It's as easy as that. Pro tip number 1, perform a quick holding briefing prior to the hold.
And pro tip number 2, use OBS to create the inbound course and suspend sequencing.
Pro tip number 3, use the autopilot heading and nav modes while holding.
As you can see, holding on the G1000 is not that difficult.
No, what typically bites people are those last-minute holding instructions.
Use the 6Ts along with OBS, and the next time you get one of those rare unpublished holds, you too will be able to manage it.